All right, so today we are doing a deep dive into mac and cheese. We've got a really great classic recipe here, and then some history about mac and cheese, and then some stuff about why this dish is just such a classic. So, you might be thinking about this because you're getting ready for a potluck, or you just want to like seriously up your mac and cheese game for like your family. So,
Hmm.
first of all, let's go back in time. Our recipe here actually gives us a little bit of a history lesson. And mac and cheese, it turns out it's not originally from America.
Yeah, that's right. Mac and cheese has its roots in Europe, maybe even as far back as Italy.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to think about how food travels and changes over time.
Yeah. And it's really cool how a dish can like travel across continents and then just become a staple. And speaking of traveling, get this, Thomas Jefferson, he's actually the guy who's credited with making mac and cheese popular in the US, and he even served it at a state dinner. Oh.
Wow. Yeah, serving mac and cheese at a state dinner back then probably meant that it was seen as a pretty fancy dish. It's kind of funny how different that is from how we think about it today as just like a simple comfort food.
It really makes you think about how what we think about food changes. Okay, so now that we've talked about the history a little bit, let's get into the recipe itself. So this recipe says that it's really important to use good cheese. Cheddar, Gruyere, or American are all good options if you want that like creamy texture. And of course, the big question, breadcrumbs on top or no breadcrumbs on top? What do you think?
Oh, I think it's got to have the breadcrumbs, got to have that crunch. But even more important than the breadcrumbs is that the recipe says not to use pre-shredded cheese. You know, it might seem like a small thing, but it really does make a difference.
Oh, really? I'm curious, why is pre-shredded cheese bad?
Well, pre-shredded cheese usually has cellulose in it so that it doesn't clump up. And that's fine when it's in the bag, but when you're
Right.
trying to make a nice, smooth, melted cheese sauce, it's not so good. The cellulose actually like blocks the proteins in the cheese from sticking together the way they should. And you can end up with a sauce that's grainy instead of smooth.
Huh. Well, I never knew that. Little details can have a big impact, huh? Okay, so now let's get into actually cooking this thing. This recipe uses the classic steps. First, you cook the pasta, but just al dente, so it still has a little bite to it. Then you make the roux, that's the butter and flour mixture, that's the base of the sauce. And then you make the creamy sauce by slowly adding milk and cream and, of course, the cheese. And one really important tip, you got to whisk it constantly so you don't get lumps.
Yeah, whisking is super important. And while we're talking about technique, let me give you another tip. If you want to make that sauce extra creamy, try saving a little bit of the cheese sauce and then stirring it in right before you serve it. It's like a burst of cheesy goodness at the end.
I love it. Now, the recipe also says that you can get creative with what you add to your mac and cheese. Like you could add bacon or caramelized onions or roasted vegetables. It's kind of like a blank canvas for your cooking imagination.
That's so true. That's part of what makes mac and cheese so great. You can make it simple or fancy, whatever you want. Like in New England, they have lobster mac and cheese on the menus. And in the South, a lot of people add pimento cheese to their mac and cheese to make it different.
Oh, that's interesting. It just goes to show you how mac and cheese can change and reflect what people like in different parts of the country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all these different variations really show that mac and cheese is more than just food. It's a reflection of culture and tradition.
I completely agree. It's a dish that brings people together and it has that feeling of comfort and nostalgia. It's almost like a culinary time capsule that takes you back to your childhood with every bite.
And that connection to our emotions is a big reason why we love mac and cheese so much. It's something that speaks to our senses and to our memories. It reminds us of spending time with family and holidays and just those simple pleasures that make us happy.
You're totally right. It's more than just food, it's an experience. Okay, so before we get too lost in all the cheesy nostalgia, let's recap what we've learned so far. We talked about how mac and cheese is actually European, and then it came to America thanks to Thomas Jefferson. And we've gone over the key parts of making a really delicious recipe.
Yeah, and we've started to talk about why this cheesy dish is so important to our culture and how it connects us to memories and traditions that we share with others.
So we've covered a lot of cheesy ground already, but there's still so much more to talk about. So stay tuned because we're going to keep going on our deep dive into the amazing world of mac and cheese after a quick break.
We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
We're back. And it's really interesting how mac and cheese has gone from being this like fancy dish served at state dinners to like the ultimate comfort food.
Yeah, it's true. And I think it shows how food can reflect like changes in society and culture.
Mm.
What people used to think was a really high-class food can become something everyone eats every day.
Yeah.
And it can go the other way, too. It's like this back and forth between taste and trends and tradition.
Right. And mac and cheese seems to have found this perfect balance. It's fancy, but also approachable, you know? It makes you think about the past, but it can also be new and different. And besides how adaptable it is, there's something really special about how connected we feel to mac and cheese. It makes you feel warm and comforted and like you're sharing something with other people.
That's so true. Mac and cheese is like a time machine that takes you back to your childhood. Those tastes and textures can make you remember things so clearly. You remember family gatherings and holidays and just like feeling happy when you were eating.
You know, that's funny you should say that. I remember one Thanksgiving when I was a kid and like all the food on the table was too grown up for me. But the mac and cheese, that was like my safe space. It was familiar and comforting and so good. And even now, when I smell mac and cheese baking, it brings back those nice warm feelings.
That's a perfect example of how food becomes part of our memories. And it's not just about individual experiences either. Mac and cheese is often a really important part of traditions that we share with other people.
You're right. Like, think about potlucks or family reunions or even just dinner during the week. Mac and cheese is often the main attraction, the thing everyone's looking forward to. It's something that brings people together. It's like a symbol of togetherness.
Yeah, and that feeling of togetherness goes beyond just eating together.
Hmm.
Mac and cheese has become like a pop culture icon. It's in movies and TV shows and even cartoons. It represents comfort and indulgence and that feeling of happiness you had as a kid.
It's like that scene in Home Alone where Kevin McAllister makes himself that huge plate of mac and cheese. So classic. It's funny how even in made-up worlds, mac and cheese means home and comfort.
Exactly. It's this universal symbol that everyone understands no matter what culture they're from or how old they are. And, it's interesting to think about how mac and cheese has changed in the culinary world. It's still very much based on tradition, but it's also become a way for chefs to be innovative and creative.
Right. We've seen gourmet mac and cheese become a thing. Chefs are using all these fancy cheeses and truffle oil and lobster, you name it. It's amazing how a dish that's so simple can be made into something so fancy.
Yeah, and that's part of why mac and cheese is so interesting. It can be both humble and luxurious. It can be nostalgic and modern at the same time. It's like a chameleon in the culinary world. It changes to fit different tastes and trends, but it always keeps that cheesy, creamy goodness that we all love.
I love that. It's like mac and cheese is constantly changing, but it never forgets where it came from. And speaking of change, I think it's time we helped our listeners put their own spin on this classic dish.
I like that. We've talked about the history and the science and what it means to our culture, but now it's time to get creative and find your own personal connection to mac and cheese.
So listeners, we want to hear from you. What does mac and cheese mean to you? What memories does it bring back? And most importantly, how would you make it your own?
Think about the flavors you like and the ingredients that inspire you. Don't be afraid to try new things and break the rules. Maybe you love spicy food and want to add some jalapenos. Or maybe you love seafood and want to make a creamy shrimp and scallop mac and cheese.
There are so many possibilities. We've given you the basics, but now it's your turn to take charge and become the mac and cheese master. So we've gone through like the whole history of mac and cheese. We've talked about what it means, like culturally. We even got into like the science behind how to get that perfect melty cheese. But now it's time to like actually use all that knowledge. So get your aprons ready, everyone. We're going to make you all mac and cheese masters.
Yes, exactly. We've given you the tools, the basics, but the real fun starts when you get to play around and make the dish, your own. Remember, there's no right way to make mac and cheese. It's all about finding out what works for you and what you like.
That's so true. It's like, think of it as a jazz solo. You have the main melody, but now it's your turn to improvise and make it your own style. So where do we even start? We should start with the most important part of any good mac and cheese, the cheese itself.
Yeah, choosing the right cheese is key. We talked about cheddar, Gruyere, and American as kind of classic choices. But you don't have to stick to those. Think about the flavors that you like. Do you like something like sharp and tangy or something more nutty and mild? Or maybe you want to try mixing different cheeses to get like a more complex flavor.
It's like you're composing like a cheese symphony. And don't forget like how good your cheese is will determine how good your sauce tastes and its texture. So don't be cheap with the cheese.
Right, exactly. Okay, so once you've figured out your cheese situation, it's time to think about the sauce. Do you want it to be super smooth, like coating every noodle? Or do you like it when it's a little thicker?
And remember that trick we talked about earlier? If you save a little bit of the cheese sauce and stir it in right before you serve it, it'll be extra creamy.
Oh yeah, all about those little details. And speaking of details, don't forget of the seasoning. Salt and pepper are super important, of course. But you can also have fun with other spices. A little nutmeg will give it a nice, warm, comforting taste. And if you like it spicy, you could add a pinch of cayenne pepper.
Ooh, I like that idea. And while we're talking about flavor, we have to talk about the things you can add to your mac and cheese. This is where you can really get creative and make it your own.
Exactly. Think about what you like to eat, whether it's, crispy bacon, caramelized onions, roasted veggies, even some fresh herbs. You can keep it classic or you can get adventurous.
Exactly. There's no rules when it comes to cooking. So maybe you love spicy food and want to add jalapenos or sriracha. Or maybe you're a seafood person and you want to try making a lobster mac and cheese.
The possibilities are really endless. And remember, don't be afraid to experiment. You might just discover your new favorite way to make mac and cheese.
Yeah, that's what cooking is all about, having fun and trying new things. And as you go on your mac and cheese journey, just remember to relax and have fun. Don't worry too much about making it perfect. It's about enjoying cooking and making something that you're proud of.
I totally agree. And once you've created your cheesy masterpiece, share it with everyone. We want to see what you come up with.
Definitely tag us on social media with the hashtag #DeepDiveMac and show us your amazing mac and cheese creations. We can't wait to see what you all make.
So there you have it. Everything you need to know to become a mac and cheese expert. We've covered the history, the techniques, the cultural significance, and most importantly, how many different ways you can make this dish.
Remember, mac and cheese is more than just food. It's an experience, a tradition, a chance to get creative in the kitchen. So go out there and experiment and make your own cheesy mark on the world.
Until next time, happy cooking, and may your mac and cheese always be cheesy, creamy, and full of delicious memories.
Stay cheesy, everyone.